Namaste and greetings. I, Naina Agarwal, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, प्रभाव एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान नई दिल्ली, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI Web Policy Learning. Today, we are gathered here for day two session of a 3-day online certificate training program on disaster resilient housing and built environment, imperative for better policy, planning, and sustainable cities. This training program is organized by the National Institute of Disaster Management, NIDM, Ministry of Home Affairs, Govt of India, in collaboration with IMPRI, Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies, New Delhi. I welcome all of you to this enlightening deliberation and thank you for being interested and putting your time, energy, and efforts into understanding emerging issues concerning the impact of policies in promoting sustainable habitat, built environment, and resilient cities, and helping us to bring together the practitioners and participants through this course for impactful policy research and action. The patron for this program is Shri Taj Hassan. Our conveners are Professor Anil K. Gupta, Dr. Soumyadeep Chattopadhyay, Dr. Simi Mehta, Dr. Arjun Kumar. This program is convened and moderated by Shri Tikendra Singh Panwar, former Deputy Mayor, Shimla, Senior Fellow, IMPRI. This 3-day training program has an excellent panel of members who will be sharing knowledge on the above theme. The distinguished panel of members for this program are Professor K.T. Ravindran, Ms. Suhasini Iyer, Ms. Vanessa Peter, Professor Manoj Parmar, Mr. Sameer Unhale, Shri Romi Khoshla, Professor Darshini Mahadevia, Professor Shipra Mitra, Professor Manjula Bharti. The organizing team member for this program are Fatima Amin and Dr. Divya Vaidya Das, NIDM, Kushagra Khatri, Utkarsh Dwivedi, Diya Goswami, Fiza Mahajan, and Naina Agarwal, IMPRI. Before we start today's session, I would like to announce the housekeeping announcement once again. Please join the meeting on time. There will be Q&A session after each presentation. Share your question on the Q&A box and not on the chat box. The question must not be posted as an anonymous attendee. Ensure that your questions are precise. Refrain from making general comments in the question to save time. Now, without any further ado, I would like to invite Shri Tikendra Singh Panwar ji to start the session, following which we will start with our expert session. Looking forward to learning from our esteemed gathering. Sir, over to you.
Naina Tikendra sir, connection issues in Shimla. We can start with our expert panel. When SMM is ready, let us introduce.
Okay.
Is that?
I would like to invite our first expert for today's session, Ms. Vanessa Peter. Ma'am is founder, Information and Resource Center for the Deprived Urban Communities, IRCDUC, Chennai. Ma'am's topic is post-disaster resettlement housing, need for policy safeguards, for vulnerable communities. We welcome you, ma'am, and over to you.
Thank you so much. A very good morning to all of you. I'm glad to be part of this webinar and looking at the panelists as well as the organizers. We're very happy to be representing the issues of the vulnerable communities. So today's the presentation is going. Oh, 1 second. Oh, that seems to be. Anyways, I'll just. Today what the presentation topic that we are going to be talking about is post-disaster resettlement housing. And are you able to see my screen? There seems to be some
No.
issue suddenly. Oh, yeah. So, yes.
It's working. Yes.
Thank you. So the topic for the day is post-disaster resettlement housing and the need for legal and policy safeguards for vulnerable communities. So this entire presentation is going to be based on our experience in Tamil Nadu, especially from Chennai, which is the capital city of Tamil Nadu. So as you see in the first slide, for us, for the most vulnerable communities, resilience means building houses and not breaking them. And from our experiences of working in disaster, especially Chennai being a capital city of Tamil Nadu, which is also a coastal city, we have faced several disasters like floods and tsunami. So from the tsunami in 2004 to the floods, massive floods in 2008 and 15, and as well as in 2021, we found one trend which was very common after the disasters. That is this mass eviction drive of the most vulnerable communities. And now, when I say eviction, it also means, shifting these communities from their places of livelihood. And for the vulnerable communities, their livelihoods are often location centric, and which means pushing them to the peripheral areas of the city where there is no livelihood options specifically for them. So we found that after the tsunami, there are over 7,000 odd families who were resettled. And ever since then, we found after any of the disasters like flood or even the cyclone storms, we find that there is a massive eviction. So this is the the details of the number of families that were shifted from 2015 to 2020. So since the floods in 2015, it was one of the narratives, the existing narratives is that the settlements were the reason why Chennai was flooding, and hence we need to clear the settlements. And most of these settlements who were cleared were the ones which were in the banks of Chennai. Has about 3 major rivers, and 2 of the major ones where the resettlement happened was River Kuam and Adyar. So we have about 18,000 odd families who were shifted within a span of 5 years. Now, if you were to look at the evictions that happened post-disaster eviction, 96% of the evictions were specifically for providing disaster resilient housing and restoration of water bodies. So if you were to look at the analysis of the evictions that were carried over in Chennai, we find that 88% of the evictions were carried out during the middle of the academic year, and very few settlements had processes like social impact assessment and resettlement action plan. Now, the problem with the post-disaster resettlement and eviction is that there is no process followed, which simply means, okay, people are in vulnerable area and they are in low-lying area, so let's move them. So that is exactly how it has been happening so far. And we found that of the 69 settlements that were evicted, 64 settlements did not even have any consultation. As a matter of fact, in many of these evictions that happened immediately after the Chennai floods, when we were there out in the field, we were trying to read the orders and tell communities, okay, this is where your houses are being allotted. So the community consultation or participation is completely not in the entire process. And we also found that 99% did not have receive any legal notices or even any correspondence about the kind of resettlement package. So this is something that we found, and the magnitude of the issue. So why this topic is very important, especially from the context of the vulnerable population, is that we find that after disasters, there's always a massive relocation threat. So after tsunami also, we faced almost like 15,000 families were to be evicted, and all, to resettlement sites, which are massive resettlement sites, which are located in the peripheral areas of the city. And likewise, after Chennai flood, this is the numbers that was projected in one of the government orders, which says that about 71,268 families are found to be residing in the banks of city waterways. And the currently 11,661 families were resettled. And the families who are facing eviction threat who are to be resettled are 59,607. So this is how this picture that is there in the slide is in the banks of River Kuam, where you see that there is a vacant spot here, which is basically the settlement which was evicted after Chennai floods. So this is how an eviction process generally happens. And most of the times, be it tsunami or the Chennai floods, we have realized that people were trying to recover from their losses of their losing their hearts, their belongings, and everything that they've earned. And all of a sudden, again, facing another wave of destruction is what the evictions are like. Some of these, as I mentioned earlier, most of these are mid-academic year evictions. Some of the times evictions are carried out during the monsoon as it is raining, and you have you have too many police officials present there. Some of the times it's coerced, and there is a lot of intimidation also. So one thing that we are putting forward is that, see, this is, though we are talking about this as a post-disaster context, this is also a part of the larger urban development issues that we see across the country. And one thing that we have clearly mentioned is that resettlement should always be the final option after exploring all possible alternatives. Now, I was showing you the photos of the eviction. So it is under the integrated Kuam River Eco Restoration Plan, which is implemented by the Chennai River Restoration Trust. Now, if you were to look at this particular project, we see that the slide also explains that there were three options provided for the government, which had partial resettlement and in situ development. Then the option 2 had partial resettlement, in situ development, and in situ reconstruction. And the third option is complete resettlement. However, we found that because we already had a housing stock which was located in the peripheral areas of the city, the government went ahead for 100% resettlement. And one of our bigger challenges is what happens to these land. Why should we be talking when there was a scope for in situ redevelopment? Why is it that we didn't go for it? And now the same project also clearly mentions that the land which is being cleared of the settlements are going to be used for different purposes like recreational spaces, children's playground, and food courts. And it also talks about suggested activities like vegetation plantation, riverfront beautification, creation of parks and walkways. Now, it is very ironical to see in some of these areas where settlements were demolished and resettled nearly 40 kilometers from their places of habitation. We also saw that later, after 2 years, government started building housing programs for affluent sections. So, which always means that there is a scope for reconstruction in these in situ reconstruction, which was not explored. So why we are emphasizing on that is the post-disaster resettlement especially happens with the most vulnerable communities. And there, the communities are not given the a scope to choose. There is no option of choice, but only the option of force, because you're given, if you do not accept the housing, you do not get housing at all. So with that fear, communities are forced to make the choice. So, so this is the major problem that we have seen. The problem statements are as follows. Many poor in the cities are being evicted in the pretext of climate change and ecological restoration. And there is an existing widespread propaganda by the state and interest groups that removal of encroachment is the only way for restoration or restoration of water bodies and to prevent flooding in the city. And without understanding that the poor are not encroachers, but they are settling there and they are settlers and they do have their rights. And branding the settlements of marginalized communities is illegal without taking into the factor the trends of historical marginalization is definitely an act of discrimination. And we've also seen that the argument about the poor being the reasons for destruction of environment has also been a myth, because we've had studies conducted by the government which says that less than 1% of the pollution of the rivers was attributed to the settlements. Now, one of the bigger challenges that most of us face is that the absence of alternative views on inclusion of communities in the restoration process. And especially with the post-disaster resettlement, one of the biggest challenges that we face is that there is no time. And that is what the government will be saying, we need to act fast on it. So we are going to remove them at the earliest. But however, an analysis done by IRCGC very clearly reveals that all the evictions are carried out just a month before the monsoons. So there is nothing exactly preparedness about it, because when people have at so many instances have requested for resettlement during the holidays also, those pleas are not heard. So we find that the existing model of environment conservation, as well as providing housing for the poor, is often anti-poor and anti-human rights. So, and the very fact that most of these people who are resettled are often resettled in settlements which are 30 to 40 kilometers, 20 to 40 kilometers away from their places of origin. And this kind of concentration of, and these are massive resettlement sites, which comprises from say around 6,000 to even 21 to 22,000 families. So this is specifically a case of a socio-spatial segregation perpetuated. And we also find that uprooting them from their traditional areas of livelihood means people lose their access to livelihood, their health, education, water, sanitation, and other facilities are also not adequately provided. And most of these evictions, especially the post-disaster evictions that are carried out, are violating the housing framework, adequate housing framework, and other declarations and guidelines. Now, why is it that we are demanding for legal safeguards? So if you were to look at most of the evictions that happened over the last 5 years at least, everything was based on court order. And especially after 2015, all of us, despite the fact there is a CAG report which says that the reason for flooding is actually mismanagement of handling the Chembrampakam reservoir, despite that being in black and white, we're all made to believe, the general public, the existing narrative is that the poor, the so-called encroachers, are the reason why the city gets flooded. Now, with that existing narrative, what has happened is we've had quite a bit of judgments. Now, that is basically because we do not have any legal safeguards to protect the human rights. For example, some of the judgments are as follows. One says the authorities are at the liberty to remove these encroachments by use of force. There is also another judgment which says using reasonable amount of force, and one wonders what is reasonable amount. And then there are judgments where which states that civil courts are restrained from entertaining any petition for injunction. And it goes to an extent of saying cessation of all government benefits to those living in occupied land along water bodies in Tamil Nadu, and disconnection of electricity, water connection, and even issuance of electoral identity cards. So, to a large extent, there are also writ petitions, which the orders which says that government should ensure that this kind of encouragement with respect to granting alternative shelter should not also be taken up. And we find that there are many interpretations of the existing laws where they say citizens who cannot uphold the fundamental duty cannot be heard to complain from deprivation of fundamental rights. So these are the number of some of the orders that we have witnessed over a period of few years. So you might wonder, many of us question us saying, anyway, they're living in squalid, unhygienic, low-lying, overcrowded areas which are prone to disaster. So why is it that you always are emphasizing on in situ? One problem is even the moment we talk about proximate relocation, then the issue of where is the space available gets in. But the biggest challenge is the existing, existing patterns of resettlement, which the government is following. And I'm going to show some of the findings of the research that we have done immediately a year after the Chennai floods happened. So if you were to look at it, yes, we removed them because people were evicted because their settlements were flooded. And in this screen, you will find this is one of the massive resettlement sites in Chennai, which houses about 23,000 families. And this is called Perumbakam, which is not even in Chennai district, but it is in a completely another district. Okay. So we were complaining that people were in low-lying area, and we were saying that we need to protect people from flooding, and then constructing this huge settlement in the pathways of flood completely defies the purpose of resilient housing. So this is one prime example of how during the floods we've had communities, again, you can see pictures of boats in the photograph there. And unfortunately, it's a 8-floor building. So we had in 2015, we've had at least one floor of half of or quarter of one floor, the ground floor being flooded, and the lifts were not operable. So at that point, people had to climb all the way from 8th floor, to even access basic things. And then the biggest problem was these buildings have violated several other NBC norms also. Now, this is something that you can see how, we talk about resilience, we talk about providing decent housing for communities, but this is a newly constructed housing which is leaking during the rainy season. Okay, so this is exactly how resilient housing we talk about. And habitability, one of the biggest thing why we need to talk about disaster resilient housing is that this is a prime example in Perumbakam where you have only 2 staircases, which one towards your right hand side, there is a picture that is the one of the staircases. There are only 2 such staircases with nearly 940 housing in one block, which has 8 floors. So what happens, and there is a provision for 2 lifts, elevators. So if there is an earthquake or a fire accident, this is the only escape route. So definitely this escape route is not adequate, and they've not factored provisions during the planning process. So, and towards your left is the picture of how there is an insensitive way of designing the housing. So you see that those 2 smaller windows are the ventilator from the bathroom and toilet, and towards the right in that first picture in your left side is the window which is from the kitchen, which is near the kitchen. So people do not open this window because they feel that if you open it, then you get the entire drainage because the sump is also very just underneath that. So you get the entire bad smell because one that place it often overflows. So people do not open the kitchen window also. So which means it is very difficult, and women keep asking, why is it that we were not consulted? And specifically in this housing, we also found how dignity is being trampled upon many times because in this particular housing, there is only one tap being provided, and the tap is located in the toilet. So people say, even if the tap was located in the kitchen, we can fetch water from the kitchen and use it for toilet, but we find it very difficult to fetch water from the toilet and use it for the kitchen. So apart from the lots and lots of other, the design faults in the particular settlement, And very interesting that settlement every other time, there are 3 different designs, because every time government constructed something, we had to take people's suggestion, go to the government and get the design changed. Because initially, if you see, the buildings were not well lit or well ventilated also. So apart from that, the other implications of resettlement for people, the survivors of after a disaster, are as follows. So one, the distance from workplace. For many, 51%, it is more than 20 kilometers. People will have to go by bus. So people who were essentially walking to workplaces have started using public transportation now. So 59%, it takes more than 2 hours for them to reach their place of work. And as a result, because of because of the remote location of some of the resettlement site, poor transportation connectivity, lack of safety in this particular settlement, we find unemployment higher among women, because women are forced to stay back at home because of lack of safety. Their mobility is restricted. They are completely dependent on the men folks of the houses, even for basic mobility. So we find many of the women being unemployed after resettlement. So we find that the violation of the human right to work and livelihood happens in most of these post-disaster resettlement. And you find that the figure in your left is Perumbakam, which is one of the massive resettlement site where people were resettled after Chennai 2015 floods. So many women have actually lost employment after relocation. And the worst thing is they will continue to be unemployed for more than 2 to 3 years. And this is, again, when it comes to men, you could very well see, there are many men who have also lost employment, but our researchers very clearly show that the number of women who have lost employment is always on the higher side. Now, why is there a need for legal policy safeguards? Because this is one of the reasons why we have shown the previous slides, because we feel that after disaster, especially in the post-disaster period, we have, in the name of rehabilitation, in the name of reconstruction, we have many families being forcefully evicted and resettled. So definitely there needs to be a strong legal and policy safeguards. And as I mentioned, some of the court, even the judgments are quite draconian. So there is definitely a need for legal and policy safeguards for disaster resilient housing. So why? One, see, there is discrimination in the resettlement housing program itself based on funding and project. I'll give you 2 examples. One will be after 2015, when people residing in the banks of Adyar were resettled. Adyar River flows in the district of Chennai and also in the district of Kanchipuram. There are 2 different districts, but because of Chennai Rivers Restoration Trust and a project which was there in Chennai, those who were resettled from the banks of Adyar River in Chennai got free housing, whereas people who resided in the banks of the same Adyar River in Kanchipuram district had to pay for their houses. So this was discriminatory practices. Likewise, we see the packages, resettlement packages, is based on the different projects or the funders. So we find different package for resettlement carried out under, for example, after tsunami, there was the emergency recovery program, emergency tsunami recovery project, which was funded by World Bank, which had a complete different package. So after Chennai floods, the package which was provided by Chennai Rivers Restoration Trust was completely different. And the normal resettlement that happened to clear the rivers was completely a different package. So basically, there is a discrimination in the resettlement housing program. So we found that at least in Perumbakam, there were 5-6 different sets of project affected families, including those who were resettled after Chennai 2015, who had who accessed different resettlement package. So we found that in one area, children were given, people were given subsistence allowance for 12 months, whereas the people, who were living in the same banks of the Adyar River elsewhere did not even have that, but had to pay nearly 40,000-50,000 to the government for housing. So this was the kind of disparity that was there. And in this slide, I've shown you the resilient urban design framework, which was evolved under a World Bank project for the Tamil Nadu. It was initially the Slum Clearance Board. Now it is the Tamil Nadu Urban Habitat Development Board. So now one of the things that the government posed to us is that okay, fine, we have disaster resilient structure, but what about affordability? Can all the projects implement the resilient urban design framework, which is, part of the World Bank project? Third is that Tamil Nadu in 2020, had the Tamil Nadu, evolved the Tamil Nadu Affordable Urban Housing and Habitat Policy, which has a very passing reference on disaster resilient housing. And fourth, the draft resettlement and rehabilitation policy 2021 evolved by Government of Tamil Nadu does not have any mention of post-disaster resettlements as well as be it safeguards. So we find that even the new policies that are being evolved does not address this issue. Likewise, in Tamil Nadu, they issued the specific guidelines for identifying opportunities for mainstreaming energy efficiency and climate resilience, which was issued by the Housing and Urban Development Department. And we feel that specific guidelines should also be evolved for providing disaster resilient housing, similar to the guidelines which are issued. And however, finally, when we talk about resilience, it's the people are more important. And for the vulnerable communities, housing should be seen as a social mobility. And in many cases, especially these resettlement, housing programs, actually does not work towards social mobility, but actually pushes them further, exposes them further to multiple vulnerabilities. This is what we have seen over the years, at least in the last 2 decades. So one thing that we are very clear about is when you talk about we have lots of technical solutions also being evolved for coming up with green blue strategies on housing, coming up with the disaster resilient framework and so on. But however, the key thing when it comes to resilience is that there should be a people-led participatory program. So there should be enhanced community consultation at all stages, be it the planning, implementation, the evaluation stages. Most of the time, the participation of communities, especially the vulnerable communities, is more tokenistic. So we feel that it has to be conscious decision has to be taken in having community-led. It's not community consultations like that, but community-led participatory programs needs to be evolved. There should be a framework for it, which includes involvement of community-based organizations, ensure inclusivity in terms of including women, children, as well as the other intersectional groups like the elderly, the trans person, and so on in the decision-making process. So it is very important that we work towards evolving a people-led participatory program, especially for the vulnerable communities, so that we work towards resilience and social mobility. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, we have a question for you.
Okay.
It is from Jaspal Singh Ji. What is the role of people's movement in resettlement? And why no action is not taken by Human Rights Division of the state, country, and at international level?
Thank you for the questions. So to the first, answer the first one, we've had quite a bit of resistance from the different people's movement, and that's one of the reasons where in specific projects we've been able to minimize resettlement also to a large extent. However, the last 5 years, the kind of we have many civil society organizations, we have come together, even challenged the some of the litigations even in the Supreme Court, but we have got adverse judgment. So one of the bigger problem that we've had is with the court of law, where we are not able to even get judgments to safeguard the rights of the people. So there have been consolidated effort. There has been consolidated effort from the there are various community-based groups who have been pushing towards getting the resettlement policy. That is exactly why after 10 years, we got a draft R&R policy. But however, the draft is yet to be finalized. For the last 1 year, we've been following up on the draft and sending appeals to the government to, strengthen the policy further. So that is one of the thing that we have faced. And why no? One of the biggest problem that we face, we've appealed to the different commissions in the state as well as in the national level, where one of the things that we have seen is that the moment we take it to the commissions, then the one answer that we are getting is it's in the court. It's a court. Go and challenge. It's not in our jurisdiction. It's in the court. It's an ongoing case. So why don't we go about it? So many of the problem is these writ petitions that have been filed are also filed by people with vested interests who wants the settlements cleared also in many ways. So once the matter is in the court, we are always getting that single response as to we can't do much about it when there is a issue in the court. However, the State Human Rights Commission took up one of the complaints that was raised and had a hearing and all. But what we find is the most vulnerable communities are often criminalized and stigmatized. So in that particular hearing, when we said why there are no streetlights, the official response from the government was people will break it. And then why is it that the housing is leaking? It went to an extent of making a very highly casteist comment saying that people who are resettled are beef eaters. So beef has bigger bones. So people chuck the bones in the toilet. And when the toilets get flooded, people use those long, we call it kadapara, the long rod, and they break the toilets. That's why your houses are leaking. So nobody talks about why there is a bad design. Why is it that CAG has pulled up government of Tamil Nadu for the kind of design violating the NBC norms? All those things are not factored at all during these, hearings and all that. And that is what we have also seen with the case judgments. So, yeah.
Okay. Ritika ji is here. Ritika ji, would you like to?
Yeah. Good morning, ma'am. Thank you for your session, ma'am. So many questions are there, but one important question I would like to ask is the state government in Tamil Nadu, whether it was AIADMK before or right now the current government, they have always been proactive in the resettlement of the fisher communities, pre or post floods, which has always caused loss of employment. They don't have anything else to do because this is their main source of livelihood. They cannot go into the seas. Yet no sufficient interventions have taken place regarding the aggressive commercialization of amusement parks, all these private beaches, despite there's this constant threat that there's a depleting shoreline in Chennai. So how can citizens, we as citizens, ensure accountability in such cases if the government is not doing something?
See, this is one of the things that we have been trying to do is one problem that I wanted to also mention, which was not, I think, have not mentioned in the presentation, is that lack of public support for this cause. So everywhere, because of the existing narrative that communities are like this, and hence we need to move them because they are encroachers, they are the reason for Chennai flooding. So those kind of narratives needs to be challenged first. I think that is where, as IRCDC an organization, we are more of a community-centric information hub. So we believe in taking up action researches, in documenting through evidences to the government to break some of these existing thoughts. So one is to create to create an alternative narrative, the narrative of the people. Second is to also kind of document grounded imaginaries of resilience, because there is definitely a need to do that. There is definitely resilience that, especially in some of the resettlement sites where we're working, there are grounded imaginaries of resilience which we need to capture and talk about it. Third, I think you rightly mentioned, yes, we have had two parties which are Dravidian parties which are working towards, and we have actually Tamil Nadu is also seen as a very progressive state. But however, when it comes to most of these issues, we have a very strong lobby who's pushing for privatization of beaches or, as I said, beautification of the cities and so on. So unfortunately, the lobby of the people who want cities to be smarter and beautiful are all more powerful than the struggles that the people are posing. So we often find that I can give you one example. When the Tamil Nadu urban housing habitat, the housing policy was being drafted, we never had a copy of it also. We were called for a meeting where we were not even given the draft. But however, we found that a group working towards private housing, real estate housing developers, a bigger confederation of their groups had access to the draft as well as were pushing forward for their demands. However, we found not even a single person from the community-based groups were invited for similar meetings. So I think there needs to be a collective voice saying policies for the people should be designed and should be in consultation with the people. And that also comes to the naming of the board. The Tamil Nadu Slum Clearance Board was renamed as Tamil Nadu Urban Habitat Board, and the Tamil Nadu Slum Act, which is there, was also amended, but none of it was in consultation with the community. So often we find civil society organizations as well as the government saying, deciding what is good for the people. And definitely that is not any way near empowerment.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, there is one question from Sandeep Lalji. How justified are evictions in lieu of providing resilient housing when compared with loss of both tangible and intangible heritage and culture?
See, what we have also seen, nice question. See, one thing is definitely we find that resettlement is not socially or economically a viable option, but yet we are going about it. And it's the same government of Tamil Nadu. If you look at our archaeological division, we have been, praising the river valley civilizations in Tamil Nadu. Recent archaeological findings of Tamil Nadu has been glorified for river valley civilizations, And however, on the other end, we are wiping out cultures. We are wiping out traditional habitats, very interesting was in some of the settlements, there are so many historical reasons for why people were there. For example, there's a place called Chindaduripet in Chennai, where actually when the Britishers were there, they relocated some of the weavers from Kanchipuram and they brought them here, made them resettle. They resettled them there, and then the settlement was entirely formed. And there was a cultural connotation to that particular settlement. And most of these settlements all have its own histories, especially with the naming. There's interesting reasons for why a particular settlement is named after a person or after an event or things like that. So all these will vanish. What we are doing, one is in the name of providing resilient housing. One, we are not providing resilient housing. Two, we are defying the very concept by destroying another marshland or putting people in the pathway of flood too. Third, what we are doing is wiping away the unique identities of the communities who have been residing inside Chennai. Fourth, we are creating a Chennai where there is no poor. So ultimately what we are doing, my other problem with the entire idea of looking at urban poverty issue as just housing issue is that most of the times we end up only concretizing settlement rather than addressing the social aspects of it. So one thing that we've also been advocating is that, look beyond housing solutions. It should be housing plus solutions that can actually pave way for social mobility rather than, looking at just concretizing settlements and hoping that people will develop, without providing any of the other benefits. So that is yet another thing that we have been thinking about. And definitely, because we're talking about heritage and culture, something, what has happened is the Chennai's culture is being kind of redefined when communities are being thrown out and separate ghettos are being created in the peripheral areas of the city. So, and even in that, you have in some of these resettlement sites, more than 100 people resettled from 70 odd settlements are resettled in one place, where the uniqueness of the settlements have completely disappeared from, our history.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, another question is from Jaspal Singh ji. Is there a need of people's city development plan?
Now that's a real interesting question, because this is definitely a time when Chennai is exploring our third master plan. And one thing that we really feel is that definitely there is a need for people's city development plan, where people are have the democratic spaces to design how their city wants to be. And this is one thing that we've also been raising, because after a big struggle, Chennai got its area sabhas and ward committees in our urban governance. But what we have felt is that the space for children, is also not there, because despite asking for, very ironically, even our policies say that children having bal sabhas in the gram panchayats, whereas there are no existing policies which talks about inclusion of children or having bal nagara sabhas in the urban areas. So even the policy, is very discriminatory when it comes to the urban areas, where there is no adequate space for addressing our concerns. So yes, definitely that's the answer. There should be people-led processes. There should be reimagined cities where people should, for example, we also work with the urban homeless in the cities, and we find, the master plans does not talk about the need for shelters. It does not talk about vending zones. It does not talk about recreational spaces for children. It does not talk about accessible environment for people with disabilities. It doesn't. And basically our plans are so much restricted to the civic facilities, whereas the social amenities are often being sidelined in our planning processes itself. So it's time that we think about cities as engines of development, and specifically development of the most vulnerable sections, because I believe that cities needs to be not just smart, but also humane and just.
Thank you, ma'am. Another question is from Prakash Almeida ji. Extreme weather events are a great threat. How is the level of preparation? Are smart cities plans to have hardly any mention of extreme weather events?
This I should really refer to the smart cities again, because last year when Chennai had, we didn't have much of, not like 2015 kind of a flooding situation, but yes, the flooding situation was bad last year. And one thing that we realized was, especially one of the findings after the flooding was that we realized that an area where smart cities was implemented, the flooding was more basically because they didn't plan, they put up these walls near the channels, which meant it kind of prevented the water outflow. So we found that some of the smart city projects have actually not factored climate resilience or disaster resilience into its plan, most of it at least, though we talked about stormwater drains. And see, the only problem is we think averting disaster means, yes, we need restoration of waterways, there is no doubt about it. Yes, we always think about it, but always at the expense of removing people. Second, what we feel is the solutions are not done in such a manner including the communities. Third, there is not much of a scientific thought that has gone into that. And fourth, it's always housing. And my idea, what we are suggesting is that we should also try to develop disaster resilient neighborhoods. And to mention about smart cities, the only project the smart cities in Chennai had for the vulnerable community was making one of our massive resettlement village an art village. That settlement gets water in orangish reddish color and all, but the smart city did not have solution for that. The only thing that they did was promote an art village, okay, where there were child labor, where there was child marriages prevailing. Our priority was on creating an art village there. See, there's nothing wrong about creating an art village, but address the pressing issues first when there is specific funding. So we find that most of these programs are not prioritizing the vulnerable communities. So I think that is a systemic issue which needs to be addressed, and that's what the civil society in Chennai is also gearing towards.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I'll now hand over to Nana.
Thank you, ma'am, for answering the question and giving us valuable information. Now I would like to invite our second expert for the session, Professor Manoj Parmar. Sir is Director, Kamla Raheja, Vidyanidhi Institute of Architecture, KRVIA Mumbai, and Professor Manoj Parmar's topic is Resilience and Southern Urbanism. We welcome you, sir, and over to you.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I will share my screen.
Yes, sir. Please.
Yeah. Can see the screen?
Yes, we can see. Yes, sir. You can go full screen. Yeah, perfect. Sir. Yes. Yes, sir. It's on. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I can start.
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay. So, first of all, I take the opportunity to extend my gratitude for giving the opportunity to discuss our research on Indian urbanism. I'm Professor Manoj Parmar, Director at KRVI Mumbai. I'm going to present today about resilience and community with urban stories of India. Now, urban stories of India, actually what we have been doing is, along with my practice and academics, we have worked on several research projects funded by European Union, and specifically in the area of resilience. And as a part of this research conversation, we have managed to publish 3 books on various aspects of current trends in urban India. This books basically culminates into larger discourse on resilience. So, we begin our stories with the the urbanization trends of metros and medium and small cities in India, which are encountered with archetypical issues of conflicts, traversing environment, livelihood, informal housing, depleting livability index, and reduction in affordability, all at simultaneously. Our research largely focus on medium towns, not related to metros. Simply, the reason is that these medium towns are aspired from large metros, and if it continues to do so, we'll have similar situations arising out of several issues related to the disaster. So this is an important discussion because most of the medium and small cities have deep history and integrated urban form, constituting its own ecology, livelihood pattern, mobility network, amenities, institutions, and public realm. Hence, we believe that it also requires indigenous approach in understanding of questions related to urban form. I have structured the argument of urban discourse in India around 4 broad aspects, discussing the conceptualizing. I'm sorry, this is conceptualizing the resilience research work, which is the first part of the thing. The second part is about the urban reality of India. And third, there is a need for urban theories in Indian context, without which we are trying to locate or locate solutions very often which are outside the discourse of urbanization process. And the fourth of aspects, which is narration of our ongoing research, hard and soft cities, and how do we negotiate resilience. That so we are part of this Urban Future series. We have published 3 books by Routledge, UK. We have been kind of giving this talk at various universities, disseminating this knowledge that we see very, very important part of urbanization trends in India. So 2019, we published this book, Smart Cities in India, Laboratory Paradigm or Trajectory. Actually, this book, I'm sorry about this. I don't know. So this book is actually not really acknowledging what smart city is about, but it's about what are the trends that urbanization process has set in Indian context, and why smart city needs to be far more deeper than simply a beautification project. Second, which was published, Resilience in Southern Urbanism, uh, uh, which is part of BRUCOM, Building Resilience Urban Communities, funded by EU. And third, which is in the process of publishing, which is out in 2023 January, Negotiating Resilience. So, idea of such research incubated while working on our chapter contribution in book title Trends and Issues of Housing in Asia. It was by Annapurna Shaw. And then our first book on smart cities in urban, treating India as an urban laboratory, paradigm, or trajectory, published by Routledge. Working on research, we had first-hand exposure the rapidly urbanization landscape of India, especially medium historic town. Recent urban program like Smart City Mission in India, launched in 2015, have subjected these cities to a massive and rapid transformation. Of course, which has revealed a lot of other aspects of our cities, which is how do we deal with disaster. An academic reflection on examining the gaps and challenge was imminent alongside working on a building resilient urban communities project, which was funded by EU, and which brought us to a point of a deeper understanding of resilience, especially in the context of cities of global south, and definitely India is in the focus. The question of cultural practices and social structure provided the foreground of understanding of our built environment, motivated with new thinking and growing scholarship of building better urban future. The pandemic of 2020 reaffirmed our ongoing research. This is some kind of ongoing research affirmed the question of inclusion, culture, and urban form. Inputs from subject experts, knowledge partners, friends, and colleagues from around the world greatly facilitated our academic trajectory, especially the BRUCOM and BUNICOM program. And together we have endeavored to carry research forward over many more cities and develop a scholarship on urban studies based on Indian experience, especially focused on resilience. Historically, the urban planning process in India has witnessed several paradigms, namely, satellite cities, industrial cities, knowledge cities, global cities, ecological urbanism, and now smart cities. The issue here, what we are trying to highlight, that each paradigm, tries to kind of treat things holistically as an individual standalone paradigm, and each new paradigm shows concern towards certain particular aspect of planning, which is not necessarily have anything to do with the predecessor. And there is a conspicuous absence of any structured discourse, find a common parameter. Instead, each paradigm dismisses the predecessor and not letting contribute to the maturing of planning. And this is the large problem of the problems related to planning paradigms, which is not really emerged as a kind of a way of handling various issues and aspects of Indian cities. Urbanism in India today are inspired by global symbols, models, and aspirations. Small and medium town in India often labeled interchangeably as a second and third tier cities, with growing level of consumerism, widespread use of digital technologies, global linkages, and global aspirations. Ongoing research covers 4 such cities centered around question of community and cultural practices, taking resilience in a context which is not explicitly defined by the West discourse on urbanism and resilience. The rationale behind such position is that the current discourse on any planning paradigm is heavily drawn from experience of North, percolated as a singular knowledge system. This can perhaps qualify as an offshoot of planetary urbanization. Hence, for example, it is apparent that the prevailing global perspective on resilience attempts to establish uniform trend, identify pattern of vulnerability, similarities in evolution, configuration, and political economy. So ours is more like a theoretical discussion on resilience and try to understand the large fracture which is embedded into the planning policy, and then slowly moving towards a detailed understanding case by case in our latest book on negotiating resilience. The current government at center had launched various schemes to facilitate urban transformation. I mean, what you see around 8 to 10 planning paradigms that are operating independent of each other. Some of them deal with infrastructure, some of them deal with transportation, heritage, some of them are talking about the housing, and of course, a lot of indigenously produced things under the process of Make in India and Digital India. Now, thing is that when you look at each of these paradigms operating independently, they have nothing in common, even at the fact that they are currently operating. So the emerging paradigm of planning, especially smart city mission, is aspire to be moving towards a knowledge-oriented society, which is reactive, reflective, in nature. But the discourse on resilience is glaringly missing the entire narrative. It is assumed that this kind of digital-based structural and the functional operation of city, along with controlling, monitoring, and integrating critical infrastructure of the city, this will result into better quality of life and able to cope up with resilience in the event of disaster. So urbanization trends of metros and medium and small towns are encountered with arch typical issues of conflict, traversing environment, livelihood, informal housing, depleting livability index, and reduction in affordability. So what there are 3 large questions that we have raised in our discourse: that what are the urban planning paradigms that transform urban India? And how do can we really pinpoint city by city which planning paradigm is working, and how it is really able to help us in kind of coping up with the disaster? This is a large discussion, I think, that we are raising this point, and how this kind of what are the challenges that each paradigm face, when we talk about resilience, and is there any alternate pathways besides what this planning paradigm really talks about, especially when you deal with infrastructure, the way the infrastructure has been laid out? How do we really look at the question of resilience within that? So, would it be slightly exaggeration to state that cities are being re-engineered with a techno-utopian discursive construct to promote neoliberal rationality? Or is it a narrow way of comprehending complex urban phenomena? Or is it a new planning paradigm based on neoliberal epistemology? Or is it a fact that the current mode of urban transformation model is subjecting Indian cities to be laboratory for aspiring to be global? Now, these are all several questions that we try to raise in our discussion. So, the Indian urbanism has period connotation. This research embedded in particularities of urbanism in Indian cities has vast, heterogeneous, and diverse culture and geographies across the country. Each medium cities in India are historical living cities. I think this brings the question that was raised in the previous presentation by someone on heritage. Each medium cities in India are historical living cities as diverse social and cultural geographies. Their formative circumstances are manifested in the architecture as well as the urban form. Hence, the transformation of such cities are socially and culturally different from each other. Such heterogeneity challenges the uniform policy that has been framed by the MUA and homogeneous code which are recently implemented in Maharashtra for the development and transformation. This raises a large question on the planning paradigm is moving forward. The macro-urban process are often those theorized as following the logic of neoliberal global capitalism. For instance, critical urban theory essentialize that cities worldwide are part of global capitalistic network and order. Hence, the urban processes are consequent outcome of this network. Means it requires a uniform solution, and because they are monolithic in nature. So understanding urbanity, modernity, development, and now resilience dismisses the specificities of cities of Global South. The importance of cultural practices, shared identities, symbols, everyday urbanism, which are embedded into the communities, is the perhaps only reliable way forward and determine the large goal of kind of keeping up with disaster, question of sustainability, and of course the question of inclusion in many other aspects of our living. Hence, within the given circumstances, Indian urbanism has different stories to tell and would require to be articulated as an alternate urban discourse of South. So, in the present times, our cities face many paradoxes. First, cities are worldwide bound by global bodies like UNDP, UN, SDGs, and our collective urban futures. No matter how much we think of our urban future as collective, the question of structural equality to economic opportunities across to basic services and justice compel us to think urban India once again. Pandemic 2020 has wreaked havoc globally. Yet the ways in which the cities of developed North have responded are starkly in contrast. The cities, especially in our context, where cities are densely packed with people and built fabric. Global South, resilience takes a different meaning based on the context-specific experiences and altogether different challenges posed by its own cities. The neoliberal dictates the city design and planning efforts are steered to transform the city into hard infrastructure, while people are relegated to privatized, resource-intensive, and highly consumed gated communities. What you see is an image of what I call it divided cities in one part of the Mumbai, where highly vulnerable areas for frequent flooding has transformed into a kind of a slums, and the town planning schemes just starts across the street in a more supposedly more organized way of developing community living. Efforts are directed to find ways and means to understand how people experience built environment, engage with city functioning on an everyday basis. This has resulted in the re-emergence of humanist urban thought globally and calls for integrated urban science discipline. This new imagination responds to long established critique of master plan. I mean, the very idea of master plan has to be reworked on and relooked at, and which results into dehumanizing of spaces like singular ways on which we look at the cities. And now, similarly, the way the infrastructure has been programmed to take up almost every single cities in India. So there is a structured discourse across various parts of world where people have produced people have produced various kind of literature, right from occupancy, urbanism, insurgent, speculative, subaltern, all kind of knowledge systems are actually questioning the northern dimension on resilience. And one of the important discourse that has been produced a decade back was Ordinary Cities by Jennifer Robinson, where she talks about the developmentalism model versus laissez-faire growth, especially in Southeast Asian cities, and how these ordinary cities also have particular ways of developing and dealing with like resilience. The question of cultural practice inbuilt in the everyday urbanism of Indian cities and communities are intricately tied to the question of resilience. Scholars have argued that resilience of social ecological system, its ability to absorb challenges without having to lose its integrity in system, form, or function. Number of urban studies by scholars and sociologists and ecologists or even anthropologists stressed the importance of deploying a cultural ecology perspective, better understanding of urbanization, better understanding of community living in the cities, and which will really include this idea of our history, heritage, inclusion, placemaking, traditional livelihood, and cultural association of communities that are embedded in ecologies like river, lakes, mangroves, forests. So cultural dimensions are important. At the same time, the granular understanding of material and cultural meaning, what these cities are how they are built, what kind of meaning and association cities have with various things, especially the communities across the generation have produced these artifacts. And we need to really be addressing this issue at the granular level. And city in India is very, they have diverse geography, politics, social structure, different kind of morphologies. And this requires a kind of a very customized approach based on the cities and the community. So emerging reality in India, we draw from our previous research on smart cities that came out as a volume titled Smart Cities. We extend research to add more typologies with statistical information, images, and maps to drive the point that medium cities in India are emergent urban reality. We also discuss the detail and the rapid urbanization process in medium cities are currently subjected to both materially and culturally, and how they impact the question related to resilience. What you see is an image of Shimla, how laissez-faire growth takes over the very peculiar geography, where we have kind of frequent issues with many kind of disaster, or even cities like in South India, where we have different kind of fabric livelihoods are embedded into the livelihoods are embedded into the activity of the cities. And how do we deal with how do we deal with the question of resilience when there is a strong presence of community and livelihood, or even cities which have got a religious significance, and these cities are also transformed systematically with new infrastructure. Community aspects are undermined in this entire process, And once you undermine the community in this entire process of transformation, the question of resilience, which is embedded into cultural practice, also gets diluted in the process. So the diagram that you see on the screen is an attempt to kind of develop a theoretical model where reading, understanding, and documenting any community related aspects needs to be kind of seen in the context of this 7-parameter. Of course, these are broad-based interdependency model. The granular details can vary from city to city, and this will perhaps allow us to create a kind of some kind of a system where we understand there is an order, maybe from heritage to life ecology, or from livelihood to institutions to infrastructure and everything. So this will be able to prioritize us, how do we deal with this question of resilience given situation. So our research questions are actually grouped around 6 aspects. The questions related to traditional values and systems, which is a historical perspective. Questions related to cultural heritage, water ecology, brings a multiple dimension of ecology and resilience. Question related to southern urbanism. Question related to the contemporary planning process, and a question related to vulnerabilities, current planning paradigms, and question related to the way forward in dealing with this resilience system. So there are 6 questions that we attempted to answer through our 3 books publication. We now live in a changed world, transforming every bit way than we ever had imagined. Material and moral densities in our time have risen both sheer volume and capacity, and technology has played a major role. Digital technologies have been skillfully deployed to bridge the gap between demand and supply at various sectors. But when it comes to resilience, it is still kind of a desirable situation where we expect all these paradigms to extend addressing the question of disaster. Our large theoretical framework on resilience actually looks at various scales from individual, community, and the city. And we also address this idea of various capitals of cities. How do we develop capacity buildings, preparedness, and how do we adapt? And once you do that, what are the practices that can come and help in kind of understanding the resilience index? This resilience index is not a kind of a global perspective, but it's very contextually embedded. And we hope that we, in coming research work, we will try to demonstrate city by city, community by community, and how and demonstrate how they are different from each other when we look at various scales within any given cities. So these are the 3 aspects that we bring when we publish this book, which is due in January 2023 by Routledge, and we are bringing 3 comparative perspective on. One is India, obviously. We are bringing African perspective, and we are bringing European perspective, how they deal with this idea of community resilience, and how they what they treat hard and soft cities, how they are different from Indian context. So looking at the previous model, we have subdivided model into 2 parts. The one is the human aspects, cultural aspects, community aspects, while other we relegate to hard, which is infrastructure, public places, and built fabric, and how this could really 2 things coming together and look at just resilience. When we say just as a justice to the resilience. So this ends my presentation. Thanks for giving this opportunity. I thank you all on behalf of my colleague, Dr. Binti Singh, and many more people who have really helped us in developing this knowledge based on resilience and the context of India. And once again, I thank you very much and looking forward for a more collaborative effort. Years. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, there are a few questions. The first one is from Jaspal Singh ji. Is there a need of convergence of various projects under one roof? And second one is from Sandeep Lalji. Do you think unregulated Tollywood market is responsible for the state that urbanism in southern India is getting influenced from the northern India? And he has further made a comment that I think it should be other way around, considering rich southern culture, not harmed by outsiders much when compared to north.
I think that the entire discourse that we are trying to put forth is actually putting this argument that southern urbanism is different from northern urbanism. That is the basic premises. And entire discourse of contextualizing resilience at various scales from individual to neighborhood to large area level. It's actually context specific. When in India we live in a diverse geography, and when in Indian cities, north is different from south. South has its own peculiarities, and this has to be dealt with community. It means that community engagement, when we talk about resilience, is so central, and it cannot be dealt with a planning paradigm which is a top-down approach. It means we need to dwell on a participatory approach, or we call it a local area plan, where we engage community, discussing various aspects that talks about the transformation process. Yeah.
So there's one more question. Is there a lack of collaboration between CBOs and government? It is from Jaspal Singh ji again.
I would not directly come to this idea of CBU and government. There is some collaboration, but I think the ground realities at the end are quite different. And I think you are asking this question, how can we fill the gap? It's a very important question. I think we have to identify this as a gap. It's the big gap, the ground reality. And this is where I feel the academic institutions needs to be relegated with task of understanding ground reality in their academic endeavor. This is the only reliable way where we authenticate the data to the ground reality. Very good question.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I'll hand over to Nana.
Thank you so much, sir, for answering the question and giving us valuable information.
There
Now
are some
I
questions, no? All questions. Sandeep Lalji is asking few questions. Is it?
Yeah, there are two questions, I guess.
Few questions.
Okay.
I can read the question. Yeah.
Yeah. So another question is a rating system for humans by humans. Will this help in building better resilient society in terms of people, resilience, and reduce urban-rural divide in any country for that matter?
I don't know what he means by rating system, but definitely I would elaborate this idea of resilience index. Resilience index as a basis to kind of create a system within India at various scales. This rating system kind of is a way in which build the argument of resilience against any kind of a disaster, and this perhaps will help exchange of knowledge between rural and urban, because we all know that rural communities are far more resilient in their approach than the urban communities. And this sharing of knowledge, I firmly believe will reduce the gap, or the division of rural and urban.
Thank you, sir. Nana, you can take over from here.
Is there more questions coming? Keep checking box. Pooja ji is
Would it be wise to have a system of competitions between contender organizations for preparation of master plans, CDP, etc.?
Pooja Gupta ji is asking.
The question for me?
Yes, sir.
Well, I feel we need collaboration and not a competition. I feel if you look at simple thing like smart cities based on our research, they are competing with each other. Smart cities have CEOs, and these CEOs are competing with each other, and this is the real problem because each cities are different. Instead of exchanging knowledge, we are competing, and I think we need better ways of collaborating and exchanging of knowledge. That we need to create a system that knowledge is easily shared, not territorialized. I think when you say competition, we have a tendency to territorialize. I would kind of disagree with this competition.
Thank you, sir. Nana, you can take over from here.
Thank you, sir. There is a question. India is like subcontinent. How does urbanism differ in India?
Well, this is a large question. If you look at the trends, I think you should read this book, Ordinary Cities by Jennifer Robinson. A lot of questions systematically kind of addressed. Indian urbanism has a different story. Tell me why, living couple of cities, every single city has a deep history. I mean, I asked some question that how old is Mumbai? Someone would say it's 200, 300-year-old colonial time, but Mumbai has a history of 2000 years. We have caves and we have many more historical places. So it means community was thriving at once upon a time, and cities have that deep history. And a lot of these caves are built on places where there are no such disaster issues. Or even look at the history of, like, say, 600, 700 in Mumbai, and you see all fishing villages are built on a slope, not on the flooding zone. So it means there was a very intuitive understanding of keeping up with the idea of dealing with the disaster. I think this intuitive understanding is what and how Indian cities are different from other cities. Way of doing things, which is collective, which is community driven. This is how Indian cities are different from any other cities in the northern hemisphere. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sir, more question. From which countries or best practices we can learn from for Indian perspective? What are your suggestions on this, sir?
I think this is another dilemma that we have, that we want to look for solution outside outside of us. I think we have enough such practices embedded into our own context. We need to just go back into our history and find out. I think there is a lot to learn. We have studied almost 12 cities in our academic endeavor, and they are small cities like Jabalpur, Jodhpur, that scale, Amravati, or Indore, or even Madurai, and now Chidambaram. So we found that there's a tremendous knowledge in these cities, and yes, we look for a scientific solutions, outside, because we have limited resources. But scientific solutions do not mean the community resilience. Scientific solutions are only for certain limited aspects. But if you look at long sustainable development goals for resilience, then you need to come back to your roots. You need to come back to where we are.
So there's question by Pooja Gupta ji. She was referring to competition among firms to come up with solution for a single city, just like design competition for one plot of land in architecture.
Well, Pooja, I must state that idea of designing cities quite an outdated thing, because we don't really. I don't think so. In a global, knowledge system, this idea of singular way of designing city exists anymore. I think if you look back the history of planning in 70s, last town was designed was Milton Keynes, and I think people have given up this idea of planning cities. Idea is that look at different ways of organizing ourselves, and this idea of master plan is also kind of a quite an outdated things. So I feel that we need to look at intercultural learning. I call it interculture means bringing other perspective, and this other perspective has great ability to teach us about our own perspective, our own context. I think it says that in Jennifer Robinson's book, embeddedness is elsewhereness. It means you try to see many other knowledge systems and we find the solution your own knowledge system.
Thank you, sir. This question is from Sadiki Hussain ji. If we have so many good practices, then why so many crises and yet struggling?
Well, we have a crisis where the contemporary development has intervened. That's where the crises are. Look at the cases of Chennai. I've never heard of Chennai flooding in the past, or somewhere in desert areas, the flooding, the rampant flooding. We have never heard of such phenomena. This is, or even in South India, Cochin, Kerala. This is you can see this is wherever there is a human intervention, which is so-called planned intervention, you find this kind of disaster. Because planning assumes certain structured way of moving without engaging with the community. I think this is something, the key learnings from bad practices. Good practices are in the history.
Sandeep Lalji, you can unmute and ask your questions. So many comments you have made. Sandeep Lalji. Okay, no issues. Fiza, can you read them out?
Yes, sir. In the question before, Sandeep Lalji mentioned about the rating system rather than the indexing system. And he is further commenting that we can call it self-indexing. And he is commenting that it can actually help in bringing self-interpretation of issues related to resilience to larger notice, I guess.
I think you're more or less on the side that my argument is yes. I kind of agree with this idea of rating system. Why do we follow SDGs 14 goals that are defined by UNDP, and why not get our own goal systems? This will really help us understanding our own issues, problems, and ability to cope up with them. Yeah, I agree with that.
Thank you, sir.
Right. So, sir, one question I want to pose to you, that India is also very diverse, and we have economically weaker sections, housing and low income, middle income, also high income. Many of the top or posh colonies in Delhi or Mumbai are doing such sustainable practices for built environment and other such thing, green housing. How do you see in India different kind of habitats moving towards that, and what can be the way forward, learning from other experiences?
I think previous presentation did touch that area. It is not just housing plus. I think she mentioned something which is plus. And I believe that we need to, maybe the word housing is something which I'm confused at this. Suppose we call it household. When you say household, it means many things, right? And once you start building household and densities, I think a lot of things becomes collective, because housing is simply seen as a formalizing process of formalizing. I think that's where the problem is. We are some of the things, when you deal with resilience or a disaster, we have a strong subsystem. These subsystems exist at the community level. when you formalize, we are actually undermining this subsystem. I feel that we need to really figure it out a way in which the housing is replaced with household, and household means this collectiveness. And I think the whole approach to this needs to be re-looked at. Otherwise, we will continue building what we are building, almost nowhereness.
Yeah, hi.
Yes, Vaishali ji, you are.
Yeah, hi. Thank you.
Yes.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you so much for such a good presentation. So my question is related to the the new ideas implementing in urban city. For example, recently we have seen that cooling and heating related, like one of the organization, Swiss company, and they have one SIG pumps. What uh, they are doing water up from a depth of 45 meter, and in Europe's largest alpine lake, where water remains cool all year, whole year around. And they are doing heating and cooling from that particular activity. And what are the we can say that what are the possibility of including all this thing in Indian urban city plan? New things or maybe new ideas.
I think some of this aspects, the indigenousness is where I guess the answer lies. And some of these practices I have also observed, especially visiting cities like Jaipur, no, sorry, not Jaipur, Jabalpur. We found community engaged in kind of, addressing the water scarcity in the city. City has so many lakes, but there is a water problem. And some communities are really able to address that, at the community level. I feel that the sustainability, when we discuss this idea of why I'm addressing this sustainability, because sustainability word is taken straight away from the West. We try to say what sustainability in a similar way as they talk. But here the sustainability definition is about the priority of the community. What priority community sets. And this is where I feel the question of resilience is also addressed. So if these practices are indigenous and ecologically less harmful, then obviously one should look at and explore these areas.
Yes, sir. So we can even reduce our carbon emission also. Like one of the research found that 70,000 tons of carbon.
Sorry, your sound is very.
Am I audible now, sir?
Yeah, speak a little louder.
Yes, sir. So because of these practices, actually, this particular applied in United Nations headquarter as well, and we found like 70,000 tons of CO2 per year. They have that much potential to reduce. So I think it is meeting our SDG goals as well. So if we would look from the global perspective, then
Yeah. Yeah, the only my word of caution here is that if you look at the when you say planning paradigms in India, planning paradigm in India is emergency based. Whenever there is an emergency arises, you have a planning paradigm changing. So it means planning is more incidental and not projective. I think if any of such practices, which is long-term solutions and projective in nature, and not short-term. I feel this kind of understanding should be very clear when we develop any kind of planning policies. This is for the largely policy issues also, but I think this is the large problems that when we inculcate any kind of practices, indigenous or a new practice. One is to look at long term.
yeah, right, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you for answering, sir.
So, as government has come up with Global Housing Technology Competition, GHTC, for public housing, do you think that a lighthouse solution going ahead and can be scaled?
I've not heard of this CIDCO mass housing project. So what is the question here? Because I think chat box, it's not a sort of exploitation? Isn't this sort of exploitation? Is it a question?
Yes, sir, it's a question.
How one sees this as an exploitation? If someone is developing a housing.
Just Palji, you can unmute and ask the question. Yes. Yes, please go ahead.
Sir, in urban sector, especially as because you are from Mumbai, in Navi Mumbai, the whole development is done by the SIDCO. The SIDCO has come up with the various schemes like housing schemes. They are actually coming up. Earlier, their housing schemes were mostly were for the economic weaker section, and slowly it started converting. Instead of making mass housing, they have converted selling the big plots to the builders and everything. Now the question is, when they was to sell it earlier, the value of the houses were very less, and very less amount was to be paid to the SIDCO. But now, as the values are changing under the Prime Minister Awas Yojana, when we speak about Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, when we look into the rural section or the three-tier urban regions, the subsidy what is received is very high. While when we look into the urban sector of the one tier, and then we found it like they are hardly providing 10% of the subsidy to the urban poor. So isn't this a sort of exploitation that is done by the government agency directly?
This is a kind of a answer would be slightly political in nature, because intent of the PMAY may not have directly deal with how it is being executed. This is where I feel that some kind of intermediate body which kind of evaluates the delivery system. I think that's where the problem is. Like even in MADA, when they develop affordable housing, MADA is supposed to be developing affordable housing. But MADA agency has become a developer in indirect sense, because they allowed private development. So the affordability is under scanner now. It is no more affordable. It is a market housing that you have produced. So I think somewhere this kind of answerability lies, which is a audit, some kind of audit systems. We are adding one more layer in this process, but idea is somewhere this is to be addressed outside this, not within the policy. If you make policy which are exclusive, then such practices are bound to happen.
Anna?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
So I have one more question. So you said like about exclusive policy. Can you just brief what kind of a exclusive policy will help in this area? Like if you can throw some light on that.
So, for example, I can cite an example of SRA in Mumbai. It's an exclusive policy. That policy, what does it do? It's not giving housing to poor people. Let's get this straight. They are unlocking the land. They are unlocking the land so that this land is available for outside the market. So it's a very exclusive policy. If you have an intention of giving housing to the slum dwellers, then you need to address many more issues, right? Slum dwellers are not only looking for housing, they are looking for livelihood as well. And slums actually caters to both. So if you really are out to solve the problem of housing for poor people, you just need to infrastructure slum. If you just simply infrastructure slum, then you have a housing problem solved. But that is not the case. The case is that you want to unlock the land. This is a very exclusive policy. It's not inclusive policy. It doesn't include poor, but in the context of poor, you are creating a market.
So what about your thoughts on the recent project of Dharavi?
Well, that's another brilliant example. I worked on Dharavi project myself way back in 2004. Their attempt was to map community by community, and rehabilitate them with their own livelihood. That was the prime agenda. But current modes of transformation is actually, is to, as I said, reinforcing this idea that how do we unlock, because that's a chunk of land which is almost like 4 railway stations bordering that entire area. So there is a huge commercial viability of of developing this land. So I have my doubt whether it's really addressing core issues of living and working conditions.
Okay. Sir, so do you consider this as an inclusive or exclusive?
This is exclusive.
Exclusive one.
Yeah.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Sir, even I have one question.
Yeah.
My question is why Indian urbanization is hesitant and the state of affairs is considered business as usual. And I mean, according to many experts. So how can we come out of such a situation?
So I mentioned in one of my slides that how many planning paradigms we have. I just swipe post-independence. We have a planning paradigm which is industrial cities, industrial cities, and then we have satellite cities, and then we have special economic zone, and then we have ecological cities, and then we have smart cities. Now, all this planning, paradigms, the planning policies or paradigms are operating independently. They come and they go by. The only thing in all this paradigm, one common parameter is to make sure that we replicate what is outside India. Our metaphors are lying outside India. Mumbai wants to be Shanghai, or Bangalore wants to be a Singapore. So those images are capturing our attention, and we are maneuvering our planning policies based on images. I think this process is not really addressing the core issues, and each planning does something not really acknowledging the previous one. So this process continues, and this is where we are actually hesitant, and we are almost like unguided missile when it comes to understanding urbanization. So now we are more into problem solving. That how do you develop, housing which caters to people, or how do we create a formal housing by numbers? So number game has taken over the way the urbanization process is.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
So I have a question. As the government have come up with global housing technology competition, do you think that's a lighthouse solution going ahead, and can it be scaled?
Mean to say new technology for housing? Do you mean that?
Sorry.
New technologies build housing. That's what your question is?
Sir, the global housing technology challenge, wherein other countries are making the public housing under PMAY only. Last year it was launched.
Dharavi, I'll give you an example. When Dharavi was in the focus way back in 2004. 2006, they appointed a Swedish company to carry out some rehabilitation process. And this company, through their own way of dealing with technologies in construction, they could build 7-storied housing in 21 days. Now they built one building and nothing happened after that. The thing is that these global players or global technologies are illusion in some sense, I feel. You can imbibe technology, but you cannot imbibe community living, cultural practices. I think there is a big difference. And policy makers are not really exposed to this kind of understanding. This is where I feel that there's one question that earlier the person asked, collaboration between two agencies. I think this is where it can play a crucial role when we talk about global players or global technologies talking about our housing issues.
Thank you, sir. So I would like you to ask us to give us way forward remarks.
I think my way forward is go a little backward. Understand our own cities. I think we do not have understanding of our cities. I'm making this remark with the conviction that we always look forward in the disguise that we know our past. I don't think so. I think the best way to forward is to kind of look at our urbanization process. Each cities are 1,000-year-old, maybe, I don't know. They have survived so many disasters, and I think resilience knowledge is embedded into our cultural practice. And I think we need to find a way to map them, read them, map them, represent them. I think that is absolutely missing in current urban discourse, either in academics or in the practice platform.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. So, Jaspalji is raising hand again. Okay, one last question.
Yes, sir. Sir, my question was, hello? Am I
Yeah.
audible?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
Kindly
My
be brief.
question was very, when we are speaking about the redevelopment of slums, so my question is what if the community-based organizations takes up redevelopment under SRA, and as they all have all types of skilled and semi-skilled laborers with them. I think, and then instead of handing over this to the builders, this will bring lots of can this bring changes in the scenario what we are actually in present facing, and maybe in the future also.
Yeah, actually, this is the thing. I'll tell you one interesting thing, that when 2034 development plan was formulated back in 14, in that development plan, they demarcated some of the communities in the city, and they proposed what they call it local area plan. It means community will be involved in discussing the development of that area. There's a large chunk of areas, and mostly these communities are indigenous communities. Dharavi is not a slum. Dharavi was an indigenous community. It became slum. So this arrangement was local area plan was subsequently removed from the development plan. And I don't know why such a good effort, good attempt to realize this whole process of development comes up approach. And I think many solutions are lying in this kind of approach. And I feel that one need to really think really theoretically as well as conceptually to kind of look at alternate ways of, not the direct way of bringing global players.
Ritesh, you have raised your hand. Ritesh Dasji. Okay. Ritesh is not responding. Okay, nevertheless, thank you so much, sir. So we'll move on to next session. Nana.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Before that, we can go to the Q&As until Manjula ma'am join. Housekeeping announcement.
Before we start the next session, I would like to announce the housekeeping announcement once again. Please join the meeting on time. There will be a Q&A session after each presentation. Share your question on the Q&A box and not on the chat box. The question must not be posted as an anonymous attendee. Ensure that your questions are precise. Refrain from making general comments in the question to save time. I would like to give a brief background on the training course on disaster resilient housing and built environment, imperative for better policy, planning, and sustainable cities. Among the myriad of issues pertaining to developing countries, housing and disaster resilience remain significant due to its direct impact on lives. The rapid urbanization is followed by inevitable infrastructure, which can be difficult to adapt by residents who are still deprived of the basic amenities of life. Housing is a social issue and thus cannot be solved technically. There is a shortage of housing in India, regardless of socio-economic conditions, despite numerous housing programs established by government. It is not only the quantity, but also the quality of housing that is imperative for sustainable India. The resilience of Indian cities depend not just on the physical, social, political, economical, as well as emotional aspect. Moreover, the COVID-19 pandemic has foregrounded the crucial link between adequate housing, human settlements, and people's ability to lead healthy lives. The lockdown-induced work-from-home scenario has also highlighted differential housing demand and usage. The exponential depletion of natural resources and other man-made hazards is returning the favor with the global climate change. This negative effect directly targets the human life and increases the ever-shaking vulnerability of the urban residents. Indian cities are vulnerable to disasters due to their location and diversity of geography. These disasters and urban complexity lead to an economic loss to the city, emotional trauma to those who lost their homes and families, social damage to the displaced and migrant, and political non-stability to governments. The need is to acknowledge this damage and spread awareness to all. The Indian cities need proper and strategic urban planning, which targets the different groups of residents and take care of their housing needs. Urban resilience can further be enhanced by focusing on community disasters resilient at local level and implementing nature-based solutions to protect, manage, and restore the natural and modified ecosystem sustainably. This 3-day online training program aims to bring together professionals from academia, civil society, and the commercial and entrepreneurial sector to provide a solid interdisciplinary introduction to the fundamental concepts of urban housing, disaster, resilience, and sustainability, as well as their interrelationship, perspectives, and variations, and how communities, policymakers, and the environment have linked them. It will explore possible approaches and policy recommendation for developing a resilient and sustainable urban infrastructure and built environment in which cities are not only resilient but also livable for all their residents.
Right. So Manjula ma'am has joined. Let us introduce ma'am.
Now, I would like to invite our third expert, Professor Manjula Bharti. Ma'am is Professor and Dean at School of Habitat Studies, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. Ma'am's topic is disaster, social vulnerability, and community resilience. Welcome you, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you so much. I hope my voice is audible.
Yes, ma'am.
So good afternoon to all. And we would like, to start discussing about disaster, social vulnerability, and community resilience. So these three terms, when we are looking at, it is all are interconnected. One is disaster, and I'm sure the past 2 days of sessions for you might have thrown different aspects to understand social vulnerability and community resilience. So what do you mean by vulnerability? If the class could be little, or the session, the participants could be little dialogic, then what do you mean by vulnerability? Why should we have, understandings of vulnerability when we discussed about resilience or disaster? Hello, yeah. So, like vulnerability, can we go for the next slide, please? Vulnerability in the context of a disaster management involves, like people's capacity, a diminished capacity of the people because their capacities have come down. And it could be of an individual or it could be of a group. And then what is the reason, like that the group cope up with the disaster or to resist or anticipate and recover from the impact of the disaster. So it is basically the inability or the ineffectiveness of the group or a system or a unit to withstand and respond to the hostile environment. So when we discuss about vulnerability, we can see that, okay, there could be multiple forms of vulnerability because vulnerability really speaks on the habitat on which you are located. So it could be the habitat could have a regional vulnerability. It could have a systemic vulnerability. It could be having a social or an economic vulnerability. It could be having a transportation vulnerability. So multiple vulnerabilities that you have. And so how important that vulnerability, the place in which, the locale in which you are inhabited, and then connect that vulnerability with disaster and what are the ways in which an individual, community, or a system cope up, respond, or recover from the issues of vulnerability or from the issues of disaster. So this vulnerability, like we said, no, it is not uniform. It could be multiple. So here we will be focusing not on the economic vulnerability or not on the connectivity vulnerability, but we will be looking more on the social vulnerability. Yeah, next slide, please. So these are the types of vulnerability. Then one is the physical vulnerability. That the place itself, like how vulnerable is the space after that, after the disaster occurred, and what are the basic events, what are the basic assets, that has been destroyed by the event, or the disaster, So it's basically we are trying to understand that what are the assets. And then the other one is an economic vulnerability, where we are trying to understand, how much the livelihood options of the people have been affected, how much the way in which the people leading the source of life have been affected, how much their daily life opportunities and the daily life settlements have been affected. So we are looking at that from the perspective of an economic vulnerability. Social vulnerability means what? Because every human being, when they are located in certain social systems. We call, like the social group, hierarchical systems or structures, when we are studying of sociology, we say that, okay, the individuals are not located as individuals in a society, but they may be, working as a class or a caste or a gender or an ethnic tribe. So we are trying to understand, that the way in which a class, the economic position of the group is positioned, that gives it an impetus to recover from the vulnerability, or, like it's a social thing, for example, when you're having a disaster, like certain groups like physically differently abled people, physically mentally challenged people, older people, children, women, so these are the groups who are usually vulnerable. And so how, they are being positioned in such a way to cope up with the system. So then that we speak about the social vulnerability. And then we speak about environmental, how much damage, like the ecosystem has been affected because of the disaster, because the wetland, mangroves, coastal areas, we're looking at the ecosystem, how much, that ecosystem has been affected, how vulnerable become the ecosystem because of this disaster. So when we are trying about, understanding this, we try to understand what are the physical assets, that has been lost, to the property and to the population. We try to understand that, and what is the economic vulnerability, what is the social vulnerability, and what are the environmental vulnerability. Yes, next. So when you're looking at specifically on the social vulnerability, what is vulnerability? How much you are exposed to that particular disaster, and what are the ways in which you are able, your system is able to give you a resistance, coping up mechanism, plus your resilience. So, what is the exposure? Like if the population, for example, if a population there on the coastal area, they are more exposed to the climatic change induced vulnerabilities, because right now we are working on US funded Fulbright, because we have 3 Fulbrighters have come together and started some intervention in Kerala, on the central Kerala, where we are trying to understand, high tide flood, and how, that has impacted the coastal community, and what are the ways in which the community resilience is happening, and what are the ways in which we can increase or, empower the community to resist the things using certain kind of engagements developed by the group. So when we're saying it, we naturally know that when a high tide happens, the coastal communities who are living on the banks or the coastal areas are more vulnerable. So there is a possibility for them to get exposed more for that. And the resistances. And what are the resistances? If the coastal communities are the one who are always being susceptible to this kind of induced disasters, is there any measures taken by the system, taken by the community, taken by different institutions to prevent, avoid, or reduce the losses? And then we are looking at the resilience. What are the ability of the community, to come to that stage prior to the disaster, or to reach, see, after the disaster, we're thinking, okay, these are the issues, and we need to come out of the disaster management with certain kind of desired outcomes. Whether the community has the capacity, whether the groups has the capacity, whether the system has the capacity to reach to the desired post-disaster state. So it is important to understand, when we're looking at vulnerability, important that, how much you are exposing to it, how much is the resistance to it, and what is the percentage of, or what is the adapting facilities through community resilience method. Yeah. Next slide, please. So when you're looking at it, looking at that, what are the socio-economic, when you're looking at economically, how important socio-economic database. So first of all, I said it's physical vulnerability. That means you're looking at the population, you're looking at the asset. And second one, I said it is important also to look at, it is from the economic vulnerability, where you're looking at the economic opportunities of the thing, and what is the income distribution, and what is the poverty, See, whenever we are looking at a system, and we define, poverty as, because initially, when we have an understanding of the development discourses, poverty usually been defined on the basis of income, So we have growth-oriented models, and then we have development-oriented models, and then right now we have rights-based development, because then the poverty is not looking in from the terms of only the economic deprivation, but also from other rights-based entitlement. So here one looks at, from the economic side, you're looking basically from the poverty from an economic perspective. What is the present labor market? What are the economic resources? Because when you're looking at a disaster environment, it is important to look at from the political economic framework. What do you mean by political economic framework? The production, distribution, and the consumption of resources around you. So yeah. So when we're trying, to understand, should I keep the questions right now, or is it the system is that we are answering the question then and there?
Yeah, no, ma'am. After your lecture.
After my classes. Yes. Okay. So then when we're looking at that, then there is an economic resources. Then when we're looking at from a political economic framework, so you are producing resources, you are consuming resources, you are distributing resources. So the whole question, the political economic framework to disaster, or looks at the ways in which for whom the resources has been produced, for whom, and what are the conditions and the indicators on which that need to be distributed. So what is the politics of allocation of resources? Who is getting benefited by the distribution of these resources? And what are the ways in which the equitable or the ways in which the resources has been allocated? So it is important to understand that from the from the political economic framework. And now it is important, another variable is education, whether the community, like when you're saying of education, it is both, informal and formal education is important. Because right now, one of the things that is happening is that the formal education is always being given importance, and there the indigenous knowledge of the community is always taking a backseat. But when we are thinking about a participative way of understanding for the community resilience, it's important to understand the indigenous knowledge systems of the community, because there is wisdom, So there is difference between knowledge and wisdom. So wisdom is actually coming from this indigenous group network of people who are living their life experiences, and they're speaking from their situated knowledge. So the situated knowledge, life experiences becomes important in understanding the knowledge discourses. And then the next one is governance. So what do you mean by governance? How the government is responding and acting with the people. So that is governance, no? So when you have a governance, it means how the system or the government is acting with the people. People could be political society and the civil society, So how the political society, civil society, and the state work together to address the multiple issues. And what are the ways in which the institutions is looking at the issues, and what are the ways of forward, backward linkages that's happening to the systems and the institutions to work with the government and to have a people-centered perspective to address the issue. And what is the political stability? What is the ways to control the corruption? And what are the ways of, absence of violence? Because whenever we are saying about it, any social vulnerability, the violence becomes one of the important factors. It could be related to conflict. It could be related to terrorist activities. It could be related to the systemic violence. The system could be, violent towards it. For example, when we're looking at the gender-based violence, patriarchy, it's a system, like where the structure itself is violent. So then there is a structural violence and the systemic violence. The institutions are becoming violent. The state is becoming violent to the needs and demands of the marginal community. So you also need to understand the systemic violence, the structural violence when you're looking at the governance and institutional one. And then the infrastructure. See, right now, when we're speaking about, so much work is being done on the infrastructure, especially when we're looking at the urbanization, and urbanization taking as the sprawl and the keys to the development. What is urbanization doing to the, what is the turn that we're speaking about the infrastructure within the urbanization? So when we're speaking about an urban space or a city, so what is, when we're speaking about, we always speak about violence in the city. What are the violences in the city? But it is also important to understand violence of the city. Whether the design and the architecture of the cities are violent. Is the design are, differently abled friendly? Are the designs gender friendly? Are the designs friendly to the marginalized communities? That means, the transportation facilities, is it serving to the last mile of the people who is on the outskirts of the city? So, it's important also to look at the design and the infrastructure and whether there is violence of the city. And what are the equipments, what are the non-structural components, and most importantly, what is the things about water and sanitation, So it is important when a disaster happens, this is one of the important requirements for the people. And what are the ways of, the wash, water and sanitation, who are getting access to it and how they're getting access, what are the bases of access and who's controlling the resources of access. All these questions becomes important when we're trying to understand the infrastructure, environment, see what is the land use pattern. Again, it's very important when you're looking at basically from India, an agrarian economy. What is the importance of land use pattern? What are the ways in which the land has been used? And then what are the land cover? And what is the disaster prevalences in it? Who owns the land? And what is the ways in which the land holdings are distributed? And is there a fragmentation of land? And in what way the fragmentation? In what are the ways the geographical, physical tunings of the land, all landscapes of the land, all these are important when we're looking at the disaster. And then what are the indicators? And again, for me, this is a very important topic. See how you measure the socioeconomic database. Because right now, I always speak about the importance of epistemic justice. So there is an epistemic, like we said, there's an epistemic violence. Because right now, most of the researches have been carried out. The knowledge has been constructed in a positivistic paradigm. What do you mean by positivistic paradigm? The things that could be measured directly, that there is a objective a reality that people want to measure, which has a universal standards and a monolithic standards. And then the people try to look the subject from a detached positionality. So it is important to deconstruct this normative understanding of a positivistic paradigm of research that takes away the subjective positioning of the researcher. So it is important to, then every indicator, every knowledge that we need to create need to be measured. So there is a database on which the system has been measured. So then what happened when you're looking at environmentalism? For example, environmentalism has been dominated by the positivistic group of people with the natural science. Because, you need to measure the temperature and you need to measure the land base. So everything, on the measurable things. But it is important then when you are looking at the environment, the lived reality of the people who are inhabiting in that habitat. What is the situated knowledge? How the people experience? So right now, when UNFCCC, this is one thing that I would like to say, when United Nations framework for climate change has been adopted, initially, there was not even a single mention of gender in that document. Because they never thought that gender could be a very important component when you're trying to address the climate change issue. But right now, after that has been, 92, after that, so much things have been changed and revisited because of the interventions and the demand of the right-based communities and the feminist movement were asking for that. There is a lot of things which we need to understand it from a gender perspective. So this is a socially vulnerable group and needs to address it from that perspective. So it is important to understand the indicators. What is the indicator of the social base, where, right now, see how I experiences the disaster with my body. But that bodily experiences, body as a site of experiencing the disaster is actually being taken off. So we always have other forms of indicator, and body as a nano indicator which experiences, and the way in which body could be seen as an indicator to understand the multiple vulnerability is never been in the domain of discourses. Right now, we are trying to bring all those. And so what is considered as data? And which one could be considered as data? And what could be the source of data? What do you mean by evidence? What could be considered as an evidence? Is there a shift? Is there a need to be in the shift of the evidence-based understanding? So, and what could be the knowledge? So the knowledge that was constructed from the premises of the data, measurable data, right now is just a shift in understanding. And then life history, situated knowledge, and the people experiences are also started coming as very important, data sources. And that also gives a importance of a epistemic justice against the epistemic violence when you understand the socioeconomic database. Next one, please. So when we are looking at from that, what could be that? Like I said, age could be a very important factor. The older people will be having a more vulnerable, elderly people will be having the vulnerability index will be high. So as I said about gender, and then the race, ethnicity, caste, it should be caste, and then health status, disability, access to physical and non-physical resources. And so when you're looking at the well-being dimensions, whether the people should have access to the food, food security, health, safety, displacement. What are the methods of displacement and migration? Thank you. Next slide. So now, coming from the perspective, so if you're considering this as, once we understand that there is a disaster and based on the population, based on the people who experiences the disaster, there are multiple ways in which people experience this disaster, and it is not one way. So once you understand each group experiences disasters in different way, like for example, right now there are flooding again, like in heavy rain and flooding, and then a person who is sitting, on the 10th story of a very, very, posh space in Mumbai, and that person will be, like munching a cup of tea and seeing this rain from the balcony from the 10th floor apartment. But a person who is actually living in the coastal side is not experiencing the rain like that. Even if the people are living together or living nearby or living in a regional spaces, the ways in which, the people live, the spaces, and then the women, how the women, like because of their ontological positionality, how the women experiences it, how the different caste persons experiencing it, how the people in ethnic community, tribal community experiences it. So it is important to understand that, So when we're looking at the community resilience, so resilience is basically when once we take into recognition that the disasters are not experienced by the different community people in the same way, and it has differential impact, and the differential impact, social vulnerability is one of the important reasons for the people to experience it differentially. And then once people experience it differentially, then the people's resisting capacity or responding capacity or the capacity of resilience also will vary. And it depends upon how much diversity the resources you have. You will be having resources. What are the resources? You should be having physical resources. You will be having natural resources. You will be having network resources. So you are having multiple resources. And what are the multiple ways of diversity in that? Whether the resources, there is a redundancy, the repetitiveness of the resources happening so that you can manage the situation. And then what are the institutional ways? What are the ways in which the institution responds? So the community resilience is not working in vacuum. So it needs to have a symbiotic, synergistic integration with the systems, with the institutions, structures in place, and how then the community can, from their past historical perspective, past epistemological perspective, past experiential perspective, can build their social capital, their physical capital, and their resource capital to respond to the situation. It is important to understand that. And connectedness. See, this is very, very important. When we're looking at about it, the social capital becomes very important. How connected you are. And that is where, the women are having a backseat, because the patriarchal structure of the society is not allowing much the women, the mobility to access the public spaces and also to connect outside the homes, So most of the time women are confined within the homes, and when something is happening to the home and the people who are living in the home, whether they have any connectivity to the outside spaces, public spaces, that makes them to seek help from the outside community when their relationship with the outside community is very minimal. So how much the social capital you have, how much connected you are, so that when something happens, the community can come together, or the people can come together and have a bond. So we call it as, the bridging bond. So you have a bridging capital, you have a bonding capital, within the same community, there should be a bridge from one community to another. So for that, there should like a bridge, it should be a bridging capital. Bonding capital, within the same community, how much you are bonded with each other. So when you're looking at social capital, it is important to understand how much bridging capital you have, how much bonding capital you have, and how much, that you are exercising that capital to have the daily thing. And then innovative learning. So because right now I said, when we are looking at, because right now, every time, new types of disasters are happening. We are now experiencing different forms of disasters, because of the unaccountable ways in which the anthropogenic kind of disasters, or the damages that has been happened to the ecosystem is also responding, which was not known to us. So there are, like ways in which the disasters are coming, which are not so been familiar. So to respond to that non-familiar disasters, we should come out with an innovative, not the conventional, traditional methods of resistance and resilience, but a innovative method. For example, again in Kerala, we are saying about how we are coming out with a calendar, that high tide calendar that helps the community to mark that the frequency of the high tide happenings within that particular place. So it is important to understand, the ways in which a creative, like we also have something called resource mapping. So we call it as a counter map. Not, like see, when we are mapping certain things, always we map using the conventional yards. But we should think about certain things, where we can come out with a counter mapping. For example, again, we have developed something called to measure the violence among the community. We have come out with a gender crime mapping. So women have been given certain yardsticks which has been developed from the community to measure the crimes that is happening. And that has different kind of indicators, that has different kind of measurable things, and that has different kind of ways of integration and understanding. So these are the ways in which we can come out with a different learning mechanisms, different learning indicators to understand the community. And then resilience capacity index. When we're looking at that, it is important to look at what is the resilience capacity of that, what is that index of the community. Then it depends upon the regional economic capacity. That is, you look at the income equality, and you look at the economic diversification. You also look at the business environment, and also socio-demographic capacity. We are looking at poverty, we are looking at education, we are looking at health insurances, and then disability, and community connectedness, and that is the civic infrastructure, water participation, and home ownership. And then the most important question, once we have a resilience capacity index, then the question that we need to ask very critically is that who matters, who decides, and who benefits. Next slide, please. So is it possible to play this? The first video, it is only 2 minutes. Is there a possibility to play this? Or then otherwise we'll go to the next slide.
Okay, I will try now.
Earth, our only home. Invaluable, but not invulnerable. Are we too late to save it? Climate change is making our world more dangerous, more fragile, more unequal. In these uncertain times, women and girls face a disproportionate threat of displacement, poverty, and violence. But women and girls are also a powerful force in climate action. As innovators in green energy, as defenders of the environment, and as educators of our generation and the next. Gender equality is not just a woman's issue, it's the path to our survival. So it's not too late to invest in climate action by and for women. Not too late to empower women entrepreneurs and decision makers at home. Not too late to give voice and power to this next generation of Earth's champions. It's not too late to demand commitments to build an equal and enduring future for all. Championing climate action by and for women and girls is the key to saving our planet. Join the fight for gender equality today, so that together we can create a sustainable tomorrow. It's not too late.
Next slide, please. Next slide. So when you're looking at community resilience, we need to understand, like I said, local knowledge. It is important, respecting the wisdom of the people, because it is those people who live their life. And when we are thinking about constructing a tomorrow, creating a tomorrow, it is important for their knowledge to be part of that system to make a better tomorrow. So it is important to respect the wisdom of the community who live their lives, and to understand that information network, to understand the information network, and community as a subject citizens. See, every time when we are engaging with the community, we always take the community as objects, as targets, but they are not targets, they are not objects, they are subjects. It's important to understand the community as equal partners of constructing or creating a better tomorrow. Then, when you're speaking about a community resilience, they are citizens. They are engaging with the systems. They are engaging with the spaces. They are engaging with the governance. So, it is important to understand and consider them as subject citizens. And participative decision making. The moment you started understanding respecting the local knowledge of the people, treating the community as subject citizen, naturally you can only come out with a participatory decision making thing, which speaks about then the rights-based discourse of development. Because right, I said, like that rights-based discourse of development takes poverty not as the deprivation only from the economic means, but any denial of rights then becomes poverty. So then for as a woman, like that if it is poverty means, if I'm not able to access the public spaces, I'm poor. I'm not able to, if I'm not mobile, I'm poor. I'm not able to have understanding a right over my body, then I am experiencing poverty. I don't have I cannot choose my education and life partner, then I'm experiencing poverty. So any denial of my rights then becomes a poverty. So then you have to understand the poverty from a rights-based discourses, and if farmers are not getting entitlement to the land on which they are farming, then they are experiencing poverty, and they are not having enough infrastructure facilities, then again it's the poverty. So you have to understand poverty from a rights-based discourse of development. And then the dialoguing, so one of the things that is not seen right in the plans and the decision-making process is the ways to engage with the people. Dialogue, So it is basically like, Barbara saying about it is important to have a eye and dog concept, a communication, so that, that the people can speak with each other and dialogue occurs. Social capital we already discussed, and then the community as the locus of your involvement. It is important that for whom you are doing it, they should be the locus of the engagement. Next slide, please. So then in that case, can you proceed one more? Then one more picture. Press the same slide. Yeah. So what is most important? That in today's time that we are living, I feel that what women or what people, instead of women, you can say what people, what community know and how community lives. They are not speaking with each other. Like that is what I said, we should respect the knowledge system of the community. Because when we are coming and doing some planning with the community, we are not engaging with the community. We are not having a dialogue and communication with the community. We are not respecting that indigenous knowledge system. And so what happened is that what the community knows and how the community lives are completely disjuncture. There is an eruption, there is a rupture between their knowledge system and their ways of living. So it is important that, when we are going for a community resilience thing, on the framework of, understanding the social vulnerability, it is important for the knowledge system of the community to engage, to have a dialogue with their ways of living. So it is important that when you are trying to make the habitat of the community, when you are trying to reconstruct the habitat of the community, try to understand what are the habitus. Habitus means what is their social practices, economic practices, political practices, cultural practices, and then try to make a dialogue between habitat and habitus, between their knowledge and environment, between their knowledge and then their life itself, ways of living. So it is important for this multiple knowledge systems to be part of the knowledge for reconstructing, so that, the ruptures between the ways of living and the knowledge that is happening in the present time could be rectified, and we can reimagine. When we're thinking about a reimagining tomorrow, it is important to look at from reimagining ways of the knowledge system itself, where the knowledge that has been driven by the experts need to be reconstructed, and then the knowledge system that should be merged and synergized with the knowledge system of the community, that should speak for the voice of the people, and that should be the participative language. Yeah. Thank you. Now for inviting to the questions.
Thank you, ma'am. It was a very informative session. There are a few questions. The first one is from Jaspal Singh ji. During the 2018 Kerala flood, the Kerala CM and National Opposition Party demanded the Prime Minister and National Ruling Party to declare it as a national disaster. But this was denied. Does such declaration bring any difference? If yes, what is that?
It definitely brings a change, it definitely brings a lot of that is why, like recently I'm telling that we are doing something in the central Travancore, that is in Puthanvelikara, that the place is in Kerala, where like that 2,000 families right now have been affected by the floods in the coastal areas, and we are engaging with those community, and then we are coming out with the evidence-based narratives and how they've been affected, how their houses has been completely changed, and how their life world has been affected. So there's new evidence-based narratives coming with the people, and that is what I'm saying about the disaster calendar, that we are making the people to come out and engage with that, so that one side we are trying to make the community to have a community resilience network. On the other side, we are showing this evidence-based network to the district planning committee, and the district planning committee, the collector and the group of DPO are very much engaged with that, and they're interested now to declare at the state level, high tide flood as one of the disasters, so that that you are working from two levels. One with the traditional intellectuals and the policy makers, and needs to bring out more evidence-based understanding, and the second one working with the community and then making a community pressure to move it. So that is always, like whenever we are speaking about it, is what that gives a counter hegemony, because the knowledge system has always been hegemonized. So how can we bring about a counter hegemony to the existing knowledge system through the community pressure and through the upside down through the policy thing? So that is the process that we are in.
Thank you, ma'am. Another question is from Sandeep Lalji. How correct it is to bring political system and systems concept in building disaster resilience communities in urban as well as rural setup?
It's very important here. It's very important because whatever said and done, the political society and the I can even say the whimsical understanding of the political society is important, because the law systems, laws policies are so much, designed there and then executed there. And so even when we are saying about the civil society is important as a group to engage with the system, the political society is important, because the policy framework and the systems and the expenditure and the budget allocation that we are getting from the state is all coming from the political society. So it is important. Right now also we are trying to make, that the at least the district or the state to accept high tide as a flood, even when you have the evidence-based understanding that a lot of people's livelihood has been affected, but the system is not accepting and recognizing it. So it is important for the system to understand. For example, right now we can say that caste, how the caste in India is not being taken as equivalent to that of race. So we are bringing, like the systems to bring that, okay, now there is a caste-based violence, caste system. So the system needs to, political society needs to accept it and, to make the changes. And it's not only the political society, it should not be that, but then there should be a dialogue between the political society and the civil society, where the community should be the central point of focus. Okay.
Ankita Surji, you can ask your question.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah.
I
Please
can
also
hear
introduce
you.
yourself.
Oh, okay. Thank you, ma'am. You have put forward a very nice issue which we need in today's time. So my question is, I'm actually working as a disaster risk reduction specialist, and my job is to prepare climate change action plans for cities. So when we make climate change action plans, so the first step is to conduct climate risk vulnerability assessment. And then when we do that, so generally we are not able to quantify vulnerability. So as you mentioned one formula in your slides, that vulnerability is equal to
exposure plus
something, yes, exposure plus resistance plus resilience. So I just needed some clarification on how do you distinguish between resistance and resilience, like because when I just want to quantify it.
That is some of the issues that I was right now saying about, because we are so much into the realms of quantifying things, because policy makers always says quantifying things, and I am basically a qualitative person, engaging in the qualitative methodology. But as I said, no, resistance is something, that how much, the system is there to give, the resistances, whether, like if you're qualifying it, whether there is a system, like a resistance houses, that houses house resistance to this, whether that has been taken into account. And there are certain indicators which has been designed by the disaster intervention, which says that these are the disaster methods. But when I am looking at it, I will be looking, because each spaces will be having, see, when we are looking at the coastal community, the resistance of that coastal community is coming on that habitat, right? Because I cannot have a uniform template. I can have that resistance indicator of a coastal habitat equivalent to that of a tribal habitat which I am working, because both gives me different scopes of framework, because the socio-economic framework in which a coastal community is inhabited is completely different from that in which a slum area is inhabited. And again, they are vulnerable, again different from that of a tribal habitat. So when I'm looking at it, I cannot have a uniform template, but based on the socio-economic framework in which the systems has been inhabited, you will be designing that in along with the community. That is what I said, counter mapping along with the community, resilience along with the community. Right now, if I start saying about these are the framework, then I will be questioning my own proposition.
Okay, can I ask one more question? That is, you had one slide on RCI, and there you were talking about like patriarchy, bonding between community and other aspects. So again, my question is like, do you think there is a way where we can measure this so that
see, patriarchy, for example, patriarchy could be, like multiple. See, one could be, like public patriarchy, for example. The patriarchy extending to the public spaces. See, for example, that right now, like in the local governance systems, we have a large number of women coming and occupying the local positions, and they are the cooperators and the women councillors. But even in that systems where they are the decision makers, the patriarchal system structures that is ingrained within the community, ingrained with the system, make them, or behave to them, in a way that make them sublittled, or like belittled kind of importance, So there is a there is a positionality that has been given to them, which has always been belittled. So then the patriarchy being extended towards the public side, it is the public patriarchy, and patriarchy within the homes, and then the patriarchy that is coming from the religious institutions, from the political system, from the state. So based on the systems in which you are ingrained, for example, the patriarchy that is experiencing in Mizoram and Manipur will be completely different from that is experiencing in Kerala. So you have to understand what are the social institutions, cultural institutions, religious institutions, and political institutions, and what are the ways in which the patriarchy being extended in from these institutions, and then try to understand and come out with the indicator. Because right now, like for SDG 5, when we are trying to understand SDG 5 for feminization of poverty, we are coming out with multiple indicators, based on the regional things, So how are you looking at the feminization of poverty? Feminization, like I said, any denial of rights becomes a poverty, So we are trying to look at coming from the different perspectives, not from the conventional statistics and conventional data sets. So you should have an understanding of that habitat to come out with the indicator to understand it.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. I will just say something generic now, maybe that, like as you understand, that when we calculate vulnerability vulnerability. So ultimately, we will be able to calculate the risk for the entire city or the district, right? So therefore, this is the, maybe then I can put it forward as the problem we are facing as professionals, that we are not able to quantify vulnerability. We are able to quantify the risk exposure, but not vulnerability. And that is maybe a big issue, that plans are devoid of
Ankita,
this
I,
crucial
I,
aspect.
Ankita, I tend to differ with you, right? What I said that
Okay.
you can definitely quantify, but the quantifying template should not be uniform.
Oh, okay.
What I said, that based on the regional spaces in which you are trying to understand a disaster, the vulnerability will differ in that space. See that, like I said, that when you're looking at the violence could be in multiple forms. And when someone asks me what should be the indicators of violence, I'll say that, okay, you cannot have a monolithic indicator or a monolithic block as a violence. Violence in different forms, will be different.
Okay.
So you can definitely design. That is what I said, in innovative learning, and then the research methods and the data to become out. What is evidence? What is data? This need to be re-questioned. And based on the risk factors of the community they are facing, along with the community, you have to understand the resilience. You have to understand the vulnerability. So the indicator should come from with the community along with you. That is what I said.
Yes, and Ankita ji, there are various methods of this counterfactual. It's obviously not very easy to quantify.
And
but
yeah, and counter maps. They're like you looking at the Brazilian. Very interesting. If you Google, look at the Brazilian ways in which they come out with multiple forms of social vulnerability indicators, and then with the women, very interesting. Then even the social resource mapping they're doing, community resource map they're doing, and from that social resource mapping they're trying to understand the vulnerability parameters.
Right.
So I'm not saying it is a monolithic one.
Right. So we have 3 more questions. Sara Bardhan ji, then Vaishali Sharma ji, then Britika ji. Sara ji, why don't you speak? Can you hear us, Sara Bardhan ji?
Am I audible?
You are audible. Yes.
Good afternoon,
Sarah,
ma'am.
Are you or Sarah?
Ma'am, am I audible? I'm
Yeah,
fine,
are you
ma'am.
or
How are
Sarah
you?
from this?
Yes,
Sarah,
yes,
are you?
ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. Ask me.
Ma'am, so my question was that a lot of research surrounding disaster management identifies the possibility of elite capture when funds or aid is distributed, even within the vulnerable communities. So even within vulnerable communities, the most vulnerable are often left out from receiving these benefits. So what kind of methodologies are necessary in the production of localized knowledges to highlight this unevenness that you're talking about? And also, for example, if a bureaucrat or a scholar takes this rights-based framework into this vulnerable community, how do we make sure that this rights-based framework is sustaining in that community? For example, Dalit trans persons are likely to be triply vulnerable. So how do we make sure that the ideas we take into the community are sustained over time?
Vaishali ji?
Sarah, the question is very interesting, but the question is also very complex in this modern times, because when you're saying about elite, the whole question is that who is an elite? The definition of elite is also changing. See, 50 years back, who is an elite is no more an elite today. See, if you're coming to the community, and like any that, and if you're subdividing the community again and again, because right now, like that we are again working with the hostel community, and then we have made certain kind of indicators like, okay, these are the group of people who are the elitist in that group. And when we concentrated on the marginal community, in the marginal community, within 2 months' time, the elite started emerging and evolving. So this is, this is a very commonsensical thing that one needs to understand that, okay, elite is not a way that you can keep away that elite, because the moment you have a group, elites start coming from that group, because that conflicts, the ways of interest of conflict, self-interest, and then the class and the caste and multiple things that is coming from it. This started, like continuous, it's not a static thing that I can say that, okay, these are the elite capturing, so I need to remove them from the framework, because they started continuously dynamic and changing. So we need to understand that, okay, my basic premises in that, okay, rather than elite, try to focus on the people who are on the most bottom rung, they are most of the time being static. The most bottom rung, like whose voices are completely being denied. Whether your interventions are able to reach if that taken as a acid test, if not not looking at the elitists, because they're continuously being dynamic and changing. So, but you're looking at the other side, who are the most vulnerable, and whether your intention is reaching them, and that could be a test. And that is the first question. And the second question, what was it? The second question that you are asking? Second part?
The second part of the question was that if we are using a rights-based framework and talking about resilience and resources, then how do we make sure that this rights-based approach sustains in the community, even when the parastatal or the bureaucrat or the scholar removes himself from the
I understood. See, Sarah, it is only a hope. There's a politics of hope. Like, the people are saying about, Olafray was saying about it's a politics of hope. When you're looking at the politics of pedagogy, it's also politics of hope that, you're thinking right now, let's see, at least there is an understanding that from the growth-oriented discursive development, we are speaking about a right-based discursive development. So somewhere on the public side, at least there is a recognition and an understanding, even if that has been violated all the time on the ground level realities, but then there is an understanding and recognition of a right-based discourse. So that tells me about a hope that is there. It is a possibility that, okay, when the community coming together, the community started speaking and community started exercising their agency, like we're saying about agency framework, power structures, when the community started exercising their agency through a critical consciousness, and then rupturing through the hegemonic consciousness in which they are embedded, and making them to have a critical consciousness and working this, like the groups, the so-called elitist group, I say, the moment they're interested to have in dialogue with this group, with the right based understanding into their critical mind. So then their epistemological understanding started changing. So then that started discussing, having a different discursive understanding towards the engagement itself. So that is the only hope through which, we are moving. Like, like you were saying about LGBTQ community. And, like, Sarah, just imagine 40 years back, it was complete no. 60 years back, complete no. But right now, the people are coming and asking about, the group, So the LGBTQI community that is coming up and discussing, it's actually a symbolic understanding of a politics of hope. That things are changing. So we can only work with that politics of hope, Sarah.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Okay, Vaishali ji, kindly be very brief.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much, ma'am, for such a wonderful presentation. So my question is related, first of all, this is
Can you be little louder, dear? Can you be little louder?
Yeah. Am I audible now?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, ma'am, like climate is for basically to handle the climate change, we have three parts like mitigate, adapt, and last one is the displacement, migration basically. But if we would be including a participatory model, basically for the community, and if there would be the community hegemony in particular area, then how to handle this the migration related things, because they would not accept the migration from other part where the things are very much difficult, or maybe we can say that like because of the sea level rise, if in any time if community want to displace one part to another part, and if there is some kind of a community hegemony in particular area, so they would not allow those people to settle down there. So how to handle those things, and what should be a
I got the point. I got, see, you're saying, when I'm saying about a community resilience, I'm not eulogizing the importance of community, because community itself has its own kind of mindset. Because right now, we know about, calf panchayat and honor killings. These are all the customary practices of the community. So we are not, and many places, that the community itself is so much engaging with gender-based, caste-based, tribal-based violences. So community is not a community knowledge, and community system is not something to be eulogized. You should be also critical about it. So when you're looking for that, there is a community hegemony naturally, because see, power, when you're looking at it, power, you should be looking at from a tripartite understanding of power, it is structure, agency, and power. So when you're looking at that, like structure, the community when becomes a structure, and then that structure will have exercises agency to have its power, because every structure, like whether at the individual level, household level, community level, state level, always it is inherent tendency of the human to retain the power structures. So then we will, like through the structures, we will exercise our agencies to retain that power structure. So then you're saying about the other community which is there through the hegemonic structures, which always try, because like the migration will affect the economic, regional, and then the social balances that the community is maintaining at that places, and then the migration and influx of this community could affect. So naturally that will be resistances. But then there comes the state, no? The equation of state, the welfare state that we're speaking about, how the state is looking at that issue, and whether it is a institutions, the nature, the nation, how the nations, if it is between nations, the migration, how the nation is looking at the issue, So it is between states, how the state is looking at the issue. So then the large institutions beyond that need to come into the picture to understand this faster.
Right. So last question, Kritika ji.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Am I audible?
You are very much audible.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your engaging session. My question is like comparing apple and oranges, but I feel there's a common concern in both of them. My question is, we have seen massive participation from the community, especially women, against the rising energy bills in UK and Europe. They are going through a harsh winter, and there has been massive protests, also due to the ongoing Ukraine-Russia war. But here we see in India, there is no such engagement, no over the inaction, especially in the case of rising air pollution, smog and crop burning. So how can we drive social change and social participation through community resilience in India? Because we are not seeing anything in such cases. So much is happening from the government, but nobody's asking pertinent questions regarding it.
Kritika, you are an example, no? See how your critical consciousness has been changing and asking this question in a public discourse, in a public open forum, It is an initiation of a discussion from a woman who is engaging with such questions, right?
Right, ma'am.
Huh? So that's an answer. This is only a very, very slow process. You cannot expect that. But then the critical consciousness will start emerging and you cannot stop it, so it will have its time. So give the time, because the ways in which the UK and US are positioned is not the way in which India is positioned, with multiple ways of the power equations and the social structures. So it will have its differences, But like you were saying, there are a lot of people who are now, very, see, that is what I said when we are working in Kerala on this, the US based, the US founded that program. Most of them, coming are youngsters between the age of, they are, they're saying that, okay, they're working, till 8, 9, and we are coming out with the, right now I'm going there to Kerala to come out with the right-based discourses. We are trying to make a theater group, with the group, and making them a very strong community theater group to engage with this information that is coming from multiple networks. And for that, most of the people who are coming are the engineering students, from that's elite engineering colleges from that area, and they're ready to work with us till 10:30, 11 in the night. So then there is and all are voluntary. So then that means there's a critical consciousness is coming up, and that that you give space and time and a conducive environment from the political and the civil society. And that will
Right, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am, would you like to make any way forward remarks? Just your last.
Excuse me. Yeah.
Yeah, Jaspal. Yeah, Jaspal, ask me. Unmute yourself and ask me, Jaspal.
Yeah. So my question is, can area sabha, if organized on a regular basis, can bring immediate good result for social vulnerability during any sort of disaster? It can be a social disaster, it can be
I didn't get it, Jaspal. Can you be little slower?
Yeah. Can area sabhas, if organized in a regular manner, can bring immediate good result in social vulnerability?
See, that is it. See, the whole WhatsApp bus that you're speaking about, see, that is at the local governance level. That is what I said, the participatory planning and participatory budgeting and participatory decision making is very important in my case. One of the things that, in spite of we speaking about subsidiarity. What is subsidiarity? Rule of subsidiarity says that any decision that is taking place at the lowest appropriate level it could have, that is the principle of subsidiarity. And that is what it is, or the one of the principal elements of decentralization. But right now, no one is caring about the principle of subsidiarity. anything is not happening at that lowest level, the decision could be taken. So then you are speaking about this principle of subsidiarity that speaks about and engaging with that forums where it could take the decisions and respect the decision-making powers of that forum. And once that has been there into the policy framework, so much could be done. That's fun. So much could be. The thing is that we are not recognizing, and instead of having the constitutional guarantee and then amendment that respects and recognizes it, in real practices, it has never been recognized and respected. So once that comes into our mindset to recognize and respect that decision-making power at the lowest level, using the principle of subsidiarity, things will change this far.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, can you just enlighten us with some way forward to this problem?
Way forward is, I have nothing to enlighten. I myself in a very confused state. The moment you are engaging with multiple spaces, the confusion increases. The chaotic mind becomes more muddled, and I'm more disturbed, disillusioned. In spite of this muddleness, in spite of chaotic things, I feel that being chaotic is very good, because being chaotic, that means you are getting disturbed with the things that is happening around you. So somewhere that disturbedness, that shakes the normative understanding of common sense, and that common sense is the order of things that gives the privileging position to the few. So the moment that chaotic mind is there with me, I'll be happy, and I would like the civil society and youngsters to be getting continuously disturbed by the things that is happening around you, so that we can go for a more base of solidarity through the multiple forms of resistance.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for giving us valuable information. As we have come to the end of day 2 of a 3-day online certificate training program on disaster resilient housing and built environment, imperatives for better policy, planning and sustainable cities, I, Naina Agarwal, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of National Institute of Disaster Management, NIDM, and IMPRI, Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies, New Delhi. We are grateful to our expert for the day 2 of this online certificate training program, Ms. Vanessa Peter, Professor Manoj Parmar, and Professor Manjula Bharti. We thank all of you for being interested and understanding emerging issues, considering the impact of policies in promoting sustainable habitat, built environment, and resilient cities. I would also like to thank to all our participants who have raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's deliberation. We look forward to welcoming you on 15th December at 11 a.m. for our last day of this training course by distinguished expert Sri Romi Khoshla, Professor Shipra Mitra, Professor Darshini Mahadevia, and Mr. Shamir Unhali. We are grateful if you are watching us later on YouTube or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publication. We hope you continue to join in to our future IMPRI Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning. Wishing you a good day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.